So hi folks, we're going to get started right now. So I'm going to do the welcome and then we'll hand it over to Sarah. So welcome to our virtual talk, The History of the Drakewell Site. My name is Christina Sidorico and I am the Educational Program Coordinator here at the Oil Museum of Canada, National Historic Site in Oil Springs, Ontario, Canada. I'll be moderating the presentation this evening, and I'm going to begin with some background information about Zoom before we get started. You can use the chat to talk with one another or make comments, and that will be monitored this evening by myself. If you want to send a message to the whole group, please select all attendees. To get the chat started, you are welcome to share where you're from, where you're watching from tonight. You can put questions in the chat box, or you can use the Q&A button to submit your questions, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation this evening. I'll be recording the presentation tonight, and you will receive a link with an email so you can watch it again or share it with your friends. It will also appear on the Oil Museum of Canada's YouTube channel. I want to take a moment to introduce the museum. Before we get into the presentation, the Oil Museum of Canada is a National Historic Site situated in the historical oil fields of Oil Springs, located in Ontario's first designated industrial heritage district and recognized under the Ontario Heritage Act. The museum preserves and interprets the important history of Lambton's innovation and global contributions to the pioneering oil industry. The main exhibit center was constructed in 1960 and houses over 9,000 artifacts that interpret the history and influence of Lambton's proud oil heritage. In 2021, we started renovation projects that closed the doors of the museum to the public to complete capital investments, replacing aging equipment and building systems that were beyond their life cycle, and refresh the main exhibit gallery with more interpretive displays and interactives. Due to the significant challenges relating to the supply of materials and availability of trades, we have required additional time. We are now very proud and excited to welcome the public back to the Oil Museum, as we are now open after our extensive renovations for in-person tours and visits and educational programs. Our guest speaker tonight is my good friend, Sarah Goodman, who is the education person and volunteer coordinator at the Drakewell Museum, located in Titusville, Pennsylvania, United States of America. Sarah started her museum career early, even at the age of 14, when she started volunteering at Valley Forge National Historic Park, and the rest is history, eventually leading her to the Drakewell Museum. Sarah started with the Drakewell Museum in 2014 and continues to pursue a passion of lifelong learning. Thanks for being with us, Sarah. I'm so excited to have you. I know what a great speaker you are, and what a wonderful friendship we've developed over the course of the pandemic. Our two sites have normally been a little animosity because it's us versus them, and we're so close and we share so many connections. That's like this really weird Canadian-American sibling rivalry.
It is.
And today we're so excited to welcome you to learn a little bit more, because we've heard about the Drake and we hear an awful lot, but we don't know very many of the specifics. We just hear about it, and now we want to tease out that personal history and that mythology that's grown up around the Drakewell in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to toss it over to Sarah, and feel free to put things in the chat or the Q&A. I will be monitoring, and I'll mind my P's and Q's from this side of the screen, and then we can have a nice chat on the other side.
We won't get competitive about that whole spring pool thing.
Yeah, I know.
That might come up though. But
it might. There are fun things that are different. So I encourage people to visit both sites. They're only about 4 hours difference, and I'm pretty sure the food is pretty good on the other side of the border.
yes.
I'm pretty sure that there's some very yummy things down there in Titusville. And we always have maple syrup at the Oil Museum. You can come for a butter tart.
Well, I will say this, that as my coworkers are coming up to Canada next week, I am doing my best to send a special treat up to you with them. So I'll make sure that they don't eat it along the way to visit.
I'll make sure to send something back for you guys.
All
I we just harvested stuff here on the farm.
Oh, wonderful. All right. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen so we can, talk a little bit about what is going on here at Drake Well. So let me see if I can do this properly and share the proper screen. So I think I do this, and then I click this, and I say from the beginning. Okay, what do you see?
So I can see your screen. I can also see that you might have some speaker notes on the side.
Oh, so you're looking at the wrong screen. Let me switch this. Let me switch my share screen. All right, so we have to do that.
We're all friends here, so.
Is that better?
No, I still see your speaker notes.
Why is this not working, Chris?
It worked. Honestly, friends, it worked 5 minutes ago.
It did.
I can vouch for that. But as we all know, technical difficulties affect us all. There's no stranger. I couldn't figure out the chat here for the first 5 minutes. And to show you how low tech the oil museum is, my additional light source is in my water cup. It's just a cell phone with my flashlight.
All right, so here we go.
Now you know a secret.
We're going to try this again.
There we go. Perfect. Awesome possum. I can see your screen and not your speaker notes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that is a good thing. So, birthplace of the modern petroleum industry, the valley that changed the world. That is tonight. That is what we're going to talk about this evening. So my name is Sarah Goodman. I'm the museum curator at Drake Well Museum and Park, which is the birthplace of the modern petroleum industry and sits in the valley that changed the world. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, Drake Well Museum and Park is one of 24 historic sites owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and is administered by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. Drake Well is located in Titusville, Pennsylvania, United States. And for over 85 years, the museum has preserved and interpreted the site of the Drake Well, chronicling and the birth and development of the petroleum industry in Pennsylvania, as well as its growth into a global enterprise. Our 240-acre site features a board-for-board replica of the Drake Well engine house and derrick, and it is built around a National Historic Landmark well, and that is the 69.5-foot deep well that Drake drilled. We also have a operating central power oil lease, and we have an 80-foot standard drilling rig. And then we have, of course, our newly remodeled exhibit space as well. 10 years ago, the museum completed a $9 million Commonwealth capital project to renovate the museum building. Renovations included the addition of a geothermal heating system. I know that's a little strange as we are an oil museum and we are heated and cooled geothermally. It was also, the renovations included the expansion and improvement of the museum's collection storage area. And we also had additional exhibit space added on to the museum. And at the time of our renovation, we also kind of changed our mission statement quite a bit. Our mission statement now is uncovering, preserving, and sharing Pennsylvania's rich petroleum history, connecting past to present through the diversity and perspectives, and inspiring our global audience to strive for a sustainable energy future. Our exhibits today reflect that. We explore technological, scientific, and environmental aspects of the oil industry. And we also talk about the social history of the petroleum industry. And we talk about how oil and natural gas affect every aspect of our daily lives. What we say is we tell a story of determination, innovation, ingenuity, and we just also talk about how it's a far-reaching subject that impacts every part of our lives today. But let's go back a little bit. Let's go back in history. When visitors leave Drakewell, we want them to understand why Drakewell is important. Some people think it's because Drakewell was the well that discovered oil, but as all of us attending know, we know a little bit better. We know that oil has been used around the world for thousands of years prior to the Drakewell strike in 1859. Ancient people gathered oil from naturally occurring seeps and used it for mortar, waterproofing, paint in the construction of their cities. They used it for roadways. They used it for religious ceremonies, and they also used it as an incendiary weapon of war, and also as a medicine. So it has been around many years before the Drakewell. The indigenous people of what became North America were also using oil long before European colonization. Pennsylvania's Oil Creek Valley, which is the creek that runs right here next to the museum, sits in the traditional lands of the Seneca people. And the Seneca people were gathering oil on this site since at least the early 1400s. They used pits where there was oil seeping up through the ground to capture oil. Here on the bottom right of the screen, we have an image of an oil pit here on the grounds of the Drakewell Museum. The pits are lined with wood cribbing that the archaeologists have dated to around 1420. The pit would fill with rainwater or via a natural spring, and the oil would then seep up to the top of the water and float on the surface. The Native Americans would then collect the oil using bark, feathers, cloth, or blankets to skim the oil off the surface of the water. The Seneca people were probably trading the oil with members of other tribes in the area. And we also know that when the Native Americans encountered the European settlers and things, they were also trading the oil with the European settlers. What was the primary thing the Native Americans were using that oil for? We know they were using it as a bug repellent. They were using it to waterproof animal hides, and they were also using it as a decorative paint. I can honestly attest to the bug repellent. Here in late August, we get a lot of mosquitoes and things on site. And I will say that if you put a little dab of crude oil behind your ears, it does keep the mosquitoes away. You do have a little bit of a smell, but it helps the mosquitoes. In this image, we have a Google Earth image of the the southern end of our property. And what's great about this image is the leaves are all off the trees. This is a late fall, probably early winter photo. And you can actually see those oil pits that the Native Americans dug. We also know that the European settlers that came here expanded upon these oil pits, and also Brewer and Watson, who owned this property when Drake drilled here, were also gathering oil on these pits. And then in these images, you can see where here's the image before the rain, and then on the top, it's an image with the rain. And even today in these pits, we still get oil on the top of the water that floats on the water. So Drakewell is definitely not the first well that discovered oil, and we know that. But Drakewell was the well that launched the oil industry. The Drake well strike happened at a time when there was a strong demand for large quantities of crude oil. In the 1700s, we of course were using whale oil as the primary lamp fuel and lubricant used in businesses and homes. But by the 1750s, whales were becoming harder to find because they were being hunted to extinction. The decline in supplies, plus the expense of sending the whaling ships out more and more distance, sent the price of whale oil skyrocketing. By 1830, families here in the United States were paying around $2 per gallon for whale oil. This would equate to about $80 in today's money. As you can imagine, that was pretty high price for most families here at the time. And basically it was getting harder and harder for people to light their homes, and an alternative needed to be found. And there is one such entrepreneur who figured things out. His name was Samuel Keir. In the late 1840s, Keir ran a small salt well drilling operation outside of Pittsburgh in Tarentum, Pennsylvania. For the salt well drillers here in Pennsylvania, oil was an annoying byproduct of the process of drilling. Initially, Keir let the oil that came out of his salt well run into the Pennsylvania Canal system and rivers. And you can imagine that the people that lived along the rivers and things weren't very happy with that. And we actually see some fires and things start because of the oil being poured into the rivers and the streams and the canals. So Keir's oil annoyance continued until a friend of his wife's friend became ill, and the doctor prescribed American oil. And Keir looked at that medicine and said, wait a minute, that medicine is the same thing that is coming out of my salt well. There's something to this. So around 1848, 1849, Keir follows in the footsteps of many who came before him and begins packaging and selling this waste oil as a medicine. It was known as Keir's Genuine Petroleum, and it's shown here on this slide. And it was advertised as a natural remedy that would cure just about everything and anything. Keir was a proactive salesman, and sales boomed for quite a while. In fact, Keir claimed to have sold nearly 250,000 bottles of his medicine. However, he also knew that the fad of using oil as a natural remedy would fade, and he really started to think of an alternative for this annoying crude oil that came out of his well. So Keir started doing some research and finding a new outlet for his oil, that was this annoying oil. And he began questioning if it could be used as a lamp oil. He knew that it would burn, but just burning crude oil, of course, produced too much rolling black smoke, and it smells absolutely terrible. He sent a sample of the oil to a Professor James C. Booth in Philadelphia, and Booth told him that it was suitable for burning if it could be distilled distilled at the proper temperatures and things. Based on that analysis, Keir started to experiment, and in the early 1850s, after many attempts, he figured out how to refine that crude oil into what would be known as kerosene. And this kerosene would be slow burning, and it also produced a strong, steady light, and it didn't explode easily as his first tries actually did. By 1851, he had set up the first crude oil refinery in the US at the corner of Grant Street and 7th Avenue in Pittsburgh, and began producing what people, as I said, called kerosene. He used a 5-gallon still, which we have pictured here in our collection in our exhibit. And he found an inexpensive fuel that replaced that whale oil. But the problem was there wasn't enough large quantities of crude oil, and that's what he really struggled with. We had we knew how to create kerosene, but we didn't have enough crude oil to create that kerosene. So that's where this gentleman steps in. In 1857, the Seneca Oil Company of Connecticut sent Edwin L. Drake to Titusville, Pennsylvania, and charged him with determining whether the area could produce crude oil in commercial quantities. They chose Titusville because it was proven that oil was in this area, in those natural seeps, and that oil could be gathered there in the seeps. During his trip, Drake visited salt wells in this area, and specifically the salt wells and lumber mills of Brewer and Watson Company. And the Brewer and Watson Company's sawmill was actually where our parking lot is located today. And he met with Brewer and Watson and was able to work out a lease agreement for some land on the Brewer and Watson sawmill. And he determined that this was the best prime location to collect that crude oil. So Drake returned to Titusville in May of 1858 and got to work. He began by digging a well out on the site. And this, unfortunately, after several weeks, the men kept hitting water, the hole kept collapsing. He just had a terrible time. And Drake decided to then examine or look deeper into the salt well drilling. He went down to Tarentum and hired a gentleman by the name of William Smith, who went by Uncle Billy, and met with him. And him and Billy determined that drilling would be a good thing to do for finding oil instead of actually digging for the oil. With the guidance of William Smith or Uncle Billy, they purchased a steam engine. They built an engine house and a derrick, and they began to drill. And they drilled, of course, using the percussion method of chiseling through the earth, dropping the drill bit down, turning the drill bit, pulling it back up, sharpening it, bailing out the well. And on August 27th, 1859, the Drake well struck at 69.5 feet, giving birth to that modern petroleum industry. Following Colonel Drake's success, oil fever gripped the region. If you've heard about the California gold rush of 1849, this is the black gold rush of Pennsylvania, 1859. People flocked here to northwestern Pennsylvania to find their fortune in oil. People rushed up and down the Oil Creek Valley, leasing land, drilling wells, developing the industry. For nearly a decade, Pennsylvania oil region was the center of the world's oil industry, generating new technologies, business practices, and wealth. However, the pursuit of ever more prosperity led oilmen to begin exploring outside of the oil region, eventually shifting the industry's focus away from Pennsylvania and over to the oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma. Today, the site of the Drake well features a full-size board-for-board replica of Drake's second engine house and derrick, and is located right on top of the original National Historic Landmark well at the 69.5 feet. Today, we have an operating steam engine in there, and we do pump oil in the well today, although it is for demonstration purposes only. The well did stop producing 2 years after it was struck. So it is just a demonstration model. But some people ask, well, why is it the second engine house in Derrick? That's because William Smith made a little mistake when they were drilling the well. Of course, we all know that natural gas comes out of oil wells along with the oil. And the story goes is that William Smith went in to check on the well one day and opened the door to the engine house, stuck his yellow dog lantern in, and of course that ignited the natural gas, and he burned down the engine house and the derrick. So they quickly had to rebuild. We today were able, well, I should not say today, but in 1945, they reconstructed the engine house and the derrick, the second one, based on photographs by John Mather, who was a photographer in the 1800s. And those photographs were used to create what you see before you today. But let's talk a little bit more about why and how we are the birthplace and the valley that changed the world. And this gentleman right here, Samuel Van Sickle, a very impressive man. When oil was first struck here in Pennsylvania, it was, how do you get, you can't just use the crude oil right there at the well site. You have to get it to the refinery. How do you get it to the refinery? Well, roads in the 1800s weren't so great. And of course, we were putting it into wooden barrels. We were putting those wooden barrels onto wagons. And what we end up seeing happening is, of course, there was accidents and there was leakage of oil and things. So we have to find a better way to get that oil to the refinery. We then used the waterways. We placed barrels of oil onto flat bottom barges and sent those down the creek. This became very dangerous. It also depended on the weather, whether there was enough water in the creeks and the waterways to move these barges. And then, of course, we used rail cars. And then, of course, this gentleman came along, Van Sickle. He ran the first major successful oil pipeline in 1865. He laid 5 miles of 2-inch wrought iron pipe from Miller Farm to the boomtown of Pithole. And these pipelines actually became the most efficient way to ship oil and still are basically the primary way that oil is shipped today. Also, I talked about rail cars. In 1865, the Amos and John Densmore invented the Densmore tank car. This train car allowed for the shipment of large quantities of oil along the tracks. So in the beginning, we were placing oils into the small barrels, placing those barrels into traditional train cars. But this allowed for larger quantities of oil to be shipped. It was a major breakthrough in the shipment of oil. But as you can see in these two photographs, the Densmore tank car was basically 2 stock tanks on a flat car. And it was soon realized that placing oil in these wooden tanks on train cars, of course, the train jostles and things, and wood expands and contracts. So there was some leakage and spillage. So, of course, in the oil industry, everything moves quickly. And you can see where the Densmore cars were put aside and we switched to the metal tank cars that we know today. So a very quick innovation and changeover. And Christina, I told you I was going to talk about it. I love talking about this because it's the biggest thing that I noticed when Christina and I started talking. I had actually watched one of her YouTube videos about spring pole drilling rig. Here in the US, we kicked down our spring pole drilling rig to drill for oil. doing that percussion drilling, chiseling through the earth. Of course, there in Canada, you use a spring pole drilling rig, but you're using a treadle. So it's that little bit different. And I always like to point that out, very similar, but I have to say that after studying the spring pole more and more, Christina, I agree with you. The treadle is a much better way of doing it. And I don't know why we didn't adapt it, use it here in America in the 1800s.
Because you got to dance. You got to get close and hook your arms up, and it's jigging on down. While you step on down, we jig on down.
Yeah, but it is a better way of doing it. And so now I want to say thank you for having me, but there's one more thing I have to share with you before we kind of go into some questions and answer and some discussion. And that is this. We are kind of cool because I'm guessing you all are familiar with Johnny Cash, the singer, and he put out this album called Ride This Train. And there's something really interesting about this album. He actually talks about Titusville, Pennsylvania. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute. So he actually sings about Titusville, Pennsylvania. Christina, did you know this?
I did not. I know a fair amount about Johnny Cash, since most Canadians will remember TD ran a promotion called the Johnny Cash machines. And you can go get bank machines used to be called Johnny Cash machines. They were sponsored by Johnny Cash, and he proposed to June Cutter Cash just down on the road here in London, Ontario.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool. Well,
and that was featured in the movie Walk the Line. So we know a fair amount about Mr. Johnny Cash. We love him up here.
All right. Well, I am going to play you a little bit of his song. I'm going to try to share my screen again. Oh, this is going to be scary. And see if I can play this little bit of song where Johnny Cash sings about Titusville. So I want to share that screen. All right. Can you see the YouTube screen?
We can see you.
All right. We can see the YouTube screen. All right.
Come along and ride this train. Come along and ride this train. Cross the mountains, prairies, reservations, rivers, levees, plain. Come along and ride this train. Ride this train. Ride this train with me to the year 1859. The place is Titusville, Pennsylvania. Hey, you see that makeshift drilling rig over there? It's not drilling for water, mister. It's drilling for oil. It was put there by Colonel Edwin Ellsrake. He learned that oil could be refined into kerosene. See, he was going to give them whale oil fellers a run for their money. A year went by and they went down 69 feet and nothing but dust. But then one Sunday, this old boy went to Drake and said, hey, me and the boys are on the way to church, but I just thought I'd tell you, Colonel, that hole we dug is see plumb full of that old oil. Drilling, drilling, muscle and machine, a mighty race at a devil's pace, trying to catch a dream. A rumbling sound, trembling ground, 100 feet of pure oil reaching for the sky. And the news was out. Colonel Drake's well was producing 35 barrels of oil a day at $40 a barrel. There was a stampede to northwestern Pennsylvania to rival the California gold rush. Oil was on its way. But everybody wasn't exactly sure of what to do with this new product, oil. One old Pennsylvania farmer said, I think this is going to taste mighty good, and he poured it over his hotcakes. A young Ohio merchant saw a different future for oil. 1 gallon of kerosene sold for as much as a barrel of crude oil. Well, by 1863, This ambitious man had built over 20 refineries in his hometown of Cleveland. By the way, his name was John D. Rockefeller. Drilling, drilling, muscle and...
So I just think, I love that. I absolutely love that Johnny Cash sings about Titusville, Pennsylvania. I think that that's wonderful. And to me, that kind of just emphasizes that we are the birthplace of the modern petroleum industry, and we are the valley that changed the world. I mean, John D. Rockefeller was here. One thing that about Drakewell is, after really meeting you and talking with you, Christina, and now meeting the folks from Azerbaijan and their well in Baku, and talking with people from Poland and their well, we all are the first well, and we all have our important significance in it. But it was the Drake well that kind of just pushed at everything that in Canada happened and in Poland that happened. And it just took all of that and just, it was like, okay, we got all of this, bam, let's do it. Let's expand it. Let's grow it. And that's why we're the birthplace of the modern petroleum industry. We're not the first well, but we are the birthplace. We are the first commercial well, is what we tell folks. And it's not Spindletop like a lot of people think. A lot of people think of that Spindletop in 1901 being the well, but no, Canada, Poland, us, and Baku. Yep, we're the wells.
Yes.
We are the birthplace, all of us together.
We are all the birthplace because our tagline is the first commercial oil well in North America. And
Yes.
the slogan for Petrolia is the cradle of the oil industry. But we all share that, and we've all taken those little things and combined them to make something that is unique to each site.
Yes.
So each site is unique, and each site contributed different things to the global evolution of the industry.
Yes.
Drake is unique, and because it captured American attention, and it captured that thing that Americans do so very well, which is marketing, but combining all of those things into a highly capitalistic industry. So an industry that uses a lot of capital to make a lot of money. Right. Whereas capital flows in Canada are a little bit different than the United States due to regulations and due to space. I hear very similar stories coming out of Poland, as coming out of Scotland, as coming out of Canada. We struggled with transportation networks. We still struggle with transportation networks.
Oh,
we are in the middle of a swamp. And yes, it's a swamp, but a very dry one right now.
Yes. Well, and I mean, and that's something that a lot of people don't realize about Colonel Drake, is when here in Titusville, oil was just this annoying thing. I mean, Titusville was a lumber town, and people were trying to drill water wells and drill salt wells. And it was like, oh, there's this darn oil. It's in the way. It's a pain. Yes, we use it to lubricate the sawmills and things, but it's just annoying. So when Colonel Drake came here to Titusville, it was called Drake's Folly, because everyone's like, this silly man, why is he doing this? Why is he interested in things? And he got the name Colonel Drake because the oil company was like, we need to get him some respect. So they sent a telegram addressed to Colonel Edwin L. Drake. They gave him the title of Colonel to help give him some respect here in Titusville when he was trying to get people to help him and get this industry started. And it's just amazing. But once that oil struck, once he found that oil and he was producing that oil, all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, yeah, as you said, it's that American drive. It was like, let's do this. Let's run with this. Let's capitalize on this. Yeah. But something else is the fact that here in Titusville, even though the lumber industry was here, we didn't have trains here until I think it was like a year, almost 2 years after the oil strike. So when you're talking about transportation, it was like, oh my gosh, how do we transport this? How do we get this stuff going?
Yeah. So we had a petroleum industry starting probably in the 1840s, and they were harvesting the gum beds to make asphalt. And that kind of fell apart because there was no transportation until 1858 when the trains came through. So when the trains came through, James Miller Williams, who dug the first well here, he had a readily reliable transportation network to ship his stuff to his refineries. And in the very beginning, they were refining right on site, and then just transporting the finished kerosene. But when I'm listening to stories of dumping the waste into the waterways, we did that. We did that too. And we have some Americans in Michigan that complained about it, because you gotta love the Michiganders. Their waterways, because Canada and the United States are separated by the St. Clair, they experienced the dirty ship hulls. So that was just so familiar. It just rings so true. The similarities between the evolution. So you have your chemist, which is Keel. We have Abraham Gessner here in Canada, in Nova Scotia in, I think it's 1846, with kerosene. I think he was the one that actually named it kerosene.
Kerosene,
and then we were selling it on the New York Stock Exchange. So the similarities and the differences just highlight how this was not something that one great man did, but that there was a lot of things going on of society at that period of time that were pushing men all over the world and women to develop this industry. It was a cohesion of social, cultural, industrial events that was pushing industrialization, whether it be in Europe, in Scotland with paraffin, in Poland with Lukavich, and then in Canada with Williams and Gessner.
And I mean, we know that Keir knew or had studied Gessner. He knew about what Gessner was doing, but it was, okay, what we have is different from what you have in Canada. So can we do the same thing with it? I couldn't find my oil samples are missing. I'm really upset.
Do you want some oil from Canada? It's very fragrant.
Yes, you guys have very stinky oil. Ours is a sweet crude. It's not as smelly.
We have a sour crude. And for folks that are listening in, sweet and sour are technical terms dealing with the sulfur content. And if you've ever smelled pure sulfur, it's rotten eggs or a very well-fermented fart. It's not the most pleasant smell, but I'm sure in Pennsylvania, they have the same slogan we do. That is the smell of money coming out of the ground.
And here in Pennsylvania, our crude oil is, so I did find this oil sample. These are different samples from wells around the Drake well. And like, of course, you guys can't see the color, but Pennsylvania crude oil actually has a kind of a green tinge to it, and it's very liquidy. A lot of people tell me these oil samples look like maple syrup, but no. This one here on the end, of course, is gasoline that's been refined into the gasoline. Pennsylvania crude oil very easily refines into gasoline. But our crude oil is known for being sweet crude. It's also known for its paraffin content. And this always makes me think of you, but when you showed me your little, your gum, what you call your gum balls, but this is gum beds. Yes. This is Pennsylvania paraffin. So this is, the oily wax that builds up on the casing of the well. But a neat little fun fact about it gets refined into Vaseline. It gets refined into paraffin for canning and things. And also a gentleman by the name of Milton Hershey, if you are all familiar with Hershey's chocolate, Milton Hershey actually used Pennsylvania crude oil paraffin in his chocolate to slow down the melting rate of chocolate, so that it, melted in your mouth and not in your hand. Today, they no longer use Pennsylvania crude oil paraffin. They use a plant-based paraffin now. So that was pretty cool. But this is what bothers us in Pennsylvania when we try to drill for oil, is the paraffin that builds up. It gums things up. It slows down the process. And here we've got there were some pretty interesting ways that they got rid of this this paraffin buildup on wells. I could do a whole other talk about.
Yeah, we've heard about paraffin blasting. So basically using like a water jet to clean because of the gumminess. Whereas here, because of the sour, we have so much sulfur, and we say that we have an oil industry with a natural gas problem. And that was really a problem with the oil industry on this side. Now, for folks that are listening, the difference between Pennsylvania and Oil Springs is about 4 hours. So they are very close to us, especially if you cross at the Buffalo crossing at Niagara Falls. So the similarities are so astounding. But one of the things that we're discovering in our research is the porosity between the border, that people were crossing back and forth and trading information. We do know that torpedo technology for fracking was imported from the United States. In fact, for many years, we imported the nitroglycerin from Titusville for blasting all of the wells. And the last well in Oil Springs was blasted in the 1960s.
That's amazing. That really is cool. And that's something that we are digging deeper and deeper into, is trying to find, like we know Keir knew about Gesner, but,
did Gesner know about the polls? And that's one of the things that's going to be interesting. For those of you that are listening in on this, please feel free to put some questions in the chat. But there is an international conference taking place in Sarnia Lambton and Oil Springs at the end of next week. It's an international conference discussing oil heritage, and members from the Drake Well will be showing up, as well as some of the polls and other international delegates, to discuss what really is going on in petroleum history, and they're going to be presenting their own papers. So yeah, I find many of our drillers here have family in Pennsylvania or in Ohio. And we do know that a lot of local Lambton County people went to California to drill for oil once they found the La Brea tar pits. So they were down there drilling for oil. And it's really interesting to see the interlinks. And then particularly about the 1880s, the protectionist nature of each industry. Yep. As Sarah mentioned, Rockefeller was a very aggressive industrialist. And there were protectionist policies in Canada to keep Rockefeller out because he was sniffing around.
You were very smart in doing that in Canada.
Needless to say, by the 1920s, Rockefellers did come to Canada and did some heavy investment, which is why if you go, the brand name is no longer Imperial, it's Esso, S-O for Standard Oil. Yeah. So when Canadians go to the gas pumps, Esso is Standard Oil.
And of course, here in Titusville, we have Ida Tarbell, who was a local young lady whose father worked in the oil industry and things, and she saw Rockefeller putting her family oil business and things out of business, and she grew up to become a reporter who wrote about the monopoly that Rockefeller had on the oil industry, and she was able to expose Rockefeller and, of course, kind of broke up Standard Oil from being that monopoly, that king of oil. So we celebrate Ida Tarbell here quite a bit in Titusville. Her home here in Titusville was actually just recently, it was renovated, and they added the cupola back on the top of the house and everything. And her home is open now for tours. And they also do tea parties at her house. So it's quite interesting.
That would be lovely.
It is quite fun.
That would just be so lovely.
It
As
is.
you can see, there's lots of similarities, and Sarah and I are a bit nerdy and passionate about each of our respective sites. And I'm hugely respectful of the depth of knowledge that Sarah has and the passion for the industry on that side of the border, as much as we are passionate on this side of the border. But there is just such similarities and weird linkages between transportation networks. We had to build a plank road out of the swamp, even though we had lots of asphalt. The swamp would just eat it.
I was going to say the swamp would just eat that asphalt right up.
It is. And still today, if you come into Southwestern Ontario, the roads are heavily built up. They're about 10 feet thick. Because you have to build up. And there are still within Lambton County 10-foot ditches on each side of the road for drainage. As anybody that's driving throughout the county right now will notice that there's tiling operations going on, as well as there are wells still operating. So the local industry still harvests raw crude to send to the Imperial Oil Refinery, as well as natural gas.
So here in Northwestern Pennsylvania, people do ask if we are still active in the oil industry. The big boom was probably 1859 to late 1870s, early 1880s. Then you see the drop off and you see the industry leaving here. We still do have active wells here in Northwestern Pennsylvania. In fact, Drake Well Museum and Park actually has the McClintock well, which is the world's oldest producing oil well. It struck August of 1861 and it still produces oil today. It's still, we actually only pump it about twice a year. We're down to about 20 barrels maybe a year now, but it's still an active well. And we do have a lot of, I'm going to say, mom and pop wells in the area. And then around us is very much that natural gas industry. But we still have a refinery just north of Titusville that's very active, that actually refines the sweet crude oil. A lot of the refineries in the area actually are refining Canadian sour crude and imported sour crude, but the refinery north of here refines Pennsylvania crude oil, which is really awesome.
So to compare the American site to the Canadian site, while we do not harvest crude oil on property at the Oil Museum of Canada, that's our agreement with Ministry of Natural Resources, the oil fields surrounding oil springs still produce. So Fairbank Oil, along with several other oil fields in the Oil Springs Basin, produce 36,000 barrels of oil annually, which is shipped to Imperial Oil in Sarnia, and it's refined. It is sour crude. That does not include the oil wells of Bothwell or the oil wells of Petroleum. So while the industry had a boom cycle in oil springs from about 1858, peaking in 1862, and really falling off by 1865, they moved 10 kilometers down the road to Petroleum, which is Canada's Victorian oil town, where they are still producing oil much more. It is a little bit more sour. The further north you go, the increase in sulfur dioxide content within the oil increases. And they are still producing sour crude, which is sent to Imperial. Imperial Oil owns the contracts on all the sour crude in Lambton County. So they refine all the Canadian crude. But we are still refining several million barrels of raw crude a day at Imperial, Suncor, or Shell in Chemical Valley. And a lot of that is coming from the Alberta oil fields through the interprovincial pipelines. And I don't have the exact numbers on me right now, but I want to open it up to our guests, to everybody listening. You are more than welcome, as much as Sarah and I love chattering, if you have any questions for our guest tonight. It's very rare that we get an international guest speaker to chat with us about the similarities and the differences, and as passionate and as knowledgeable as Sarah is. So if you have any questions, type them in the chat or type them in the Q&A. I can see both of them. And I would love to share them with our guest. And then we will be looking forward to our next virtual talk, which will be with Jug Minosha, retired from the Ministry of Natural Resources in November. And he will be discussing underground natural gas storage in Lambton County. So I think Enbridge just finished drilling a $1.2 million well, not too far from the Oil Museum, for underground natural gas storage. And what was the transition period like from a straight up crude oil industry to a natural gas industry? And how do we use the geology beneath our feet to store that, which a lot of it goes to our friends just on the other side of the river.
That was an interesting thing. This summer, our intern was a geology major. Usually our interns are history majors or chemistry majors and things. This year we had a geology major. And oh my goodness, did I use her knowledge and learn so much more about why the oil is here and what is beneath us, and have such a better understanding of why things are the way they are. And when you were just saying about the storage of natural gas and things, and what can happen below our feet now, it was fascinating learning from her this summer.
And it's really neat to look at a map. And if you take out the international borders and the provincial and all of that, if you take a look, you can see that Pennsylvania, Titusville, there's this really weird ridge, and it's called different things on each side of the border. I think it's called the Michigan Basin. On the American side here, we call it the escarpment, the Niagara and the Algonquin Escarpment. But really, we're on the same geologic plane. We're still harvesting oil out of the same Devonian rock layers. They have the same salt problems. We have salted water intrusion into all of our wells. Salt is a nasty thing in our wells, mostly because we have to replace the pipe because salt is corrosive. So that's why you see pipes getting pulled every 6 months to 12 months for well inspections in this area, especially in our smaller operations, because of the corrosive nature of salt.
And some of that piping, that casing pipe, that was invented by Colonel Drake.
Yes. And some of that technology was imported on this side, such as using a flax pack, a seed packer to control blowouts. 1862, we had, I think, 62 or 67 gushers within a 5-kilometer radius of the museum. And how did you control a gusher? A lot of that technology needed to be, was shared across the border. So one of those neat aspects of research that Sarah and I might, when we catch our breaths, need to have a visit and find out how did that knowledge train go back and forth? What were the connections between, because we do know that a lot of, while Canada was innovative in its own way, it also imported knowledge, such as torpedoing and other technological aspects, like a flax pack or a hemp pack.
We have to do more joint talks, because my gosh, my brain is just going. I'm like, oh, we could do a whole thing about torpedoes. We could do a whole thing about
This is exciting. I want to talk to you about torpedoes. So I can't wait for your colleagues to join in us because I think we need to set up a visit.
I think so too. I am quite sad that I cannot come up next week, but it is the anniversary of our well, so somebody has to be here to, celebrate the anniversary.
Yes, that's how July 1st goes for us. July 1st is the anniversary for not just Canada Day, but it is also the anniversary of the museum.
Yep. So if it wasn't the anniversary, I would be coming up with them. But sadly, I have to be left behind. I have joked that I will squeeze my way into a suitcase, and sneak across the border, but
We'd love to have you. I'll put you up. I've got a guest room with a king bed.
well, I will get up there to visit
one day, and I'll skip across when the borders are a little bit more fluid.
Yeah.
But we are excited to continue this relationship, to share this knowledge base. I want to thank our guest. On behalf of the Oil Museum of Canada, I want to thank Sarah first as our first international guest, and hopefully not our last. We hope to share more information with Sarah and do more of these talks. I would gladly talk to the folks in Titusville for presenting an interesting talk and attending tonight, and continuing to support local museums. Both Oil Museum of Canada and Titusville are local museums strongly rooted in their local histories. So we want you to support both sites. Your support is critical in allowing us to continue to preserve and share local history. The recording for tonight's talk will be available shortly on our YouTube channel. Check it out in a day or two. And we hope to see you again at our next virtual talk in November about underground natural gas storage with Jack Minosha, retired from Ministry of Natural Resources. And in the meantime, if you have any last minute questions, this is your opportunity. Sarah's here. I'm friendly enough, I can chat with her anytime,
and if you think of something later on down the road, just drop me an email. It's a really easy email. It is sargoodman@pa.gov. So you can always email me. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And check out our website, check out our YouTube channel. Drakewell.org is our website, and our YouTube channel is Drakewell Museum and Park. You can get a good laugh at my little children's programs on there that are fun for adults too. I do a guest artifact thing, and I hope to soon have what I call Drakewell 360, which will be little unknown facts and little videos about things around the museum. So you're always, check us out and come visit. As Christina said, we are a hop, skip, and a jump from you folks, and borders are loosening up a little bit more, so it's getting easier to go back and forth. So come on over.
Yeah, they're right in that Valley Forge National Historic District. So there's so many cool things to see out there. I can't wait to go.
Yep.
I need a little bit more vacation time.
And I will, Christina, I will try to send some goodies with my coworkers for you.
I will send some as well. I get to see them on the Saturday. I'm not privy to the entire conference, but I will see everybody when they come on the Saturday. So we're going to end it there, friends. I'm going to stop the recording once I figure out where it is. Oh.